let's address the elephant in the room, which is why was I asked to speak? I too am confused by it. When Chris came and he was like, I want to enlist younger leaders to speak, I was like, awesome, that sounds great. And he was like, I want to ask Emily. I was like, perfect. He was like, what if, I'm also going to ask Molly. I was like, absolutely. And then he was like, and I'm going to ask Joe. And I was like, sure, what? I was like, they're fantastic thinkers and orators and really good at enunciating and saying words good. But I, on the other hand, last night opened my fridge and realized that we were out of chocolate milk. So I laid down in defeat and went into fetal position for about 15 minutes. So that's the kind of mind that we're working with this morning. But here I am for what will probably be the only time I'm asked to do this. And so I have two goals. One is to say what I really do believe the Father has put on my heart to say. And number two is to not say anything too dumb that gets me kicked out of the church. I originally wrote that line and I had anything dumb that gets me kicked out of the church. And my dad said, put two just in case. So to get you guys in the right frame of mind for receiving what I have to say, think about a time where somebody was really gracious with you after you had really messed something up. And then stay in that frame of mind as you relate to me after church. Let's go. Before we really get the show on the road, I do want to point out that this is what I really feel like the Lord's been putting on my heart. And I'm really hoping that where he's been speaking to me and correcting and I think really pouring life into me, that might be able to pour life into each of you guys. So let's read the story. I am going to be reading out of 2 Samuel 6, 1 through 8. I believe that we have the verses up there. I'm reading out of the ESV. I'll read this beginning to you guys. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David arose and went with all the people who were with him in Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on the new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God. And Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs, and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nechan, which I think is a funny word, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error. And he died there beside the ark of God. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. And that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day, where God's fury kindled against Uzzah. I don't believe this is anyone's favorite Bible story. We tend to read it and be filled with a sense of horror. It's a story that, due to its dramatic nature, it's really easy to miss the point of it. There are certain stories like this that we have to be careful to not read faithlessly. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham going to sacrifice his son at the mountain, the sudden deaths of Ananias and Sapphira. Without faith, it's easy to lose perspective on what God is doing in any given moment and who God is in every given moment. The story of Uzzah and the ark is a nuanced depiction of God's goodness, grace, and, as Brother Charles often has reminded us, his seriousness. There is a danger when reading the story to think of God striking down of Uzzah as sudden or harsh or shocking. But that's far from the truth. This was to be a wonderful day throughout all of Israel. After years of running, though anointed, God had brought David to the throne, and he was here to unite Israel with this crowning jewel of bringing the ark back into the temple, into its rightful place. A parade was arranged to celebrate this grand moment. They sought out for the newest form of ark-carrying technology developed by Microsoft, in which a cart led by oxen would carry this holy symbol. All this to bring praise to God. They called the color guard and the best marching band in all of the land, my paraphrasing, to create an ambiance that would put the Macy's Day Parade to shame. People were dancing, laughing, crying tears of joy. Oh God, you are so good. And then one of the oxen's feet caught on a twig, causing the ark to slide. And Uzzah does what any person would do when they start to feel their iPhone slip from their lap at the dinner table and reaches for it to save it. And in the moment that he lays his hand on it, he fell lifeless on his face. This was not the cinematic moment with the orchestral soundtrack playing in the background that David had envisioned for this day. This was supposed to be a day of God's kingdom and people made right in Israel. Instead, it's a day where God couldn't be cool for a moment about a harmless offense to his law. Or so it seems. Let's back up a little. The Ark of the Covenant, and I hope I have a picture. There we go. Thanks. This is a really well done shot. There's so many things. They put the mic on today, and when Chris put it on, I was like, I'm going to look like Jennifer Lopez. And then I was like, do I need to upload any of the pictures? And they're like, they've got it. And I was like, you guys treat me like a prince. I was like, this is amazing. But let's back up a little. The Ark of the Covenant is a gold-covered wooden chest with a lid described in the book of Exodus as containing 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. According to the various texts within the Hebrew Bible, it also contained Aaron's rod, a pot of manna, and this ark was constructed following Moses' direct response to God's command at the Mount Sinai. These items selected by God were his will incarnate for his people. In the ark were all the instructions, tools, and aids God had given to his Israelites to free them from Egypt and to walk them into the wide open spaces that he had called them to. The lid of the ark carried 2 cherubim, which are angelic-looking creatures, who are looking down at these tools, casting judgment on the people's obedience to God's command and to their following of these aids. The lid of the ark was bowl-shaped to allow for the blood of the sacrifices to gather, covering Israel's transgressions from the cherubim's sight. When we refer to Jesus as the blood of the Lamb, we are referring to how his blood has served as the sacrifice that covers that judgment. The ark, so precious, has 4 golden loops along the bottom to slide 2 wooden beams through and to allow men chosen by God to carry the ark from place to place. This ark was made and designed in every facet by God's instruction. His instructions were fully encompassing, featuring a level of detail that rivals the iTunes terms and agreements that we also nonchalantly click past. There was no speculation on how the ark was to be handled, no loopholes, no uncertainty. God left no excuse for his people to not relate rightly with him. I think this has to do with God being a relational God. And it's the sense in him that we cling to every syllable that he has lest we die. The reason that he wants us to take his word so seriously is because he takes our relationship with him so serious. Let's read Numbers 4:15, where it says, and I'll go through this part a little bit quicker. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, as the camp set out, after that the sons of Kohath shall come to carry these, but they must not touch the holy things, lest they die. These are the things, the tent of meeting, that the sons of Kohath are to carry. Why did Uzzah have to die? Could God not see Uzzah's well-intentioned reflex was not purpose to offend his law? Uzzah was familiar with the ark, more than anyone, really. He was from a respected bloodline, which was allowed special access to the temple and its elements. For months prior to this ceremonious day, the ark had been kept at Uzzah's father's house, Abinadab. He was well aware of the special precautions that the ark was to be handled with. Being selected a pallbearer or one to accompany the ark, it had been repeated ad nauseum for how he was to handle it. And he wasn't given a calling that would allow him to handle the ark in this way. But Uzzah comes from a religious family, a good family, a family of good repute and high esteem. He was clearly highly respected to have been allowed so close to the ark in the first place. And in that day-to-day war for social status, Uzzah died. Not at the moment he touched the ark, but at the moment where the religious practices were so routine and so dead to him that he'd be willing to elevate himself past God's law because it's the right thing to do. Uzzah, as Eugene Peterson put it in his book, Leap Over a Wall, is the person who has God in a box and officiously assumes responsibility for keeping him safe from the mud and dust of the work. You see, the ark is not a symbol of us putting God in a box. It's his omnipotent presence that we get to walk alongside. Uzzah suffered death by religiosity. His spiritual life became about what he could do for God, how he could help the church, how he could praise the loudest or to serve most noticeably. Uzzah's reaching out to touch the ark was not an instinctive error made in a thoughtless moment. Rather, it was the manifestation of a lifelong obsession turned addiction with managing the ark. In the process, he made the things of God his God rather than God himself. This type of religious practice makes oneself more righteous and God a bodiless entity who is requiring of you to accomplish his purposes. This kind of twisted mindset ends up making you the one blessing our Father rather than the other way around. The ark was never supposed to be carried by a cart. As per God's command, it was to be carried by men who would bear the burden of his holiness. This technological innovation, though certainly making their lives easier, pulled the relationship of God's provision and sanctity off of their shoulders, removing the skin-on-skin relationship in order to make God more manageable. Uzzah became the poster boy for a generation of humans who displaced the divine to uncritically embrace technology. This is a good moment to ask, does technology pull us away from relationship with the Father? Do we surrender to advancing cultural norms to ease our burdens? This isn't to make this an anti-tech message, but just to touch on the incomparable value of relationship. Where are we sacrificing relationship to lighten our loads? Peterson writes that the eventual consequence of this kind of life is death. For God will not be managed, and God will not be put and kept in a box. We don't take care of God. God takes care of us. Have we become too casual about our relationships with Jesus? Have we reduced his reign to the church, forgetting that his majesty is over all things? Have we gotten caught up in practices of God without the relationship? It's at this point that it's really worth noting that it feels inappropriate that I would be the person speaking on this subject based off of my own personal struggles with these tensions. I fall on both sides of the issue. Part of me wants God to be formulaic so that I know exactly how to deal with him and not entirely have to relate to him. That there be a rule book which I could easily follow, checking off the boxes and then calling it a day. But that's not who he is or what he's desiring of us. On the other side of the spectrum, there's a part of me that wants God to be cool and not take himself too serious. One of the most impactful things that has ever been said to me is by our late friend, Josh Woodruff, who would often say that nothing is deserving of honor except for God. That meant I'd honor the things God was doing or saying, but everything else was fair game for jokes. That life principle, though having high levels of truth, has also has shaped me a lot in ways that have sort of gotten me into trouble at times. I have been on record for requesting that we replace amens with chest bumping for the fellowship. On another instance, I said that we should maybe think about installing a kiss cam during the tithes and offerings part. Just a holy kiss more than anything. And it wasn't to be weird. I thought it would spice it up. And I'd even talked about installing a dunk tank for the baptismal so that we'd all be more involved with it and to increase our church's aim, which is something that is a cool thing. And though these things are humorous, lighthearted, and well-intentioned comedy, they're making light of things that are actually quite eternal. Baptismal is an eternal piece. Communion is a moment where the prayer on earth as it is in heaven is actualized. Worship is a moment where your spirit and his spirit tune themselves to one another. These are not laughing matters. And though I certainly believe Jesus and the disciples laughed and joked together, I have recently felt convicted of cheapening what is holy. I don't believe God has called us to be unnecessarily stringent, but to be ones who see the burning bush and recognize that his presence puts us on holy ground. Enough about Uzzah for right now. The story of Uzzah continues beyond his death, and I would like us to move there. Let's read of the following events in 2 Samuel 6:12. I'm going to jump around certain verses, so I'll go 12 to 15 and then 17 to 19. And it was told to King David, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him, because of the ark of God." So David went and brought up the ark from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod, which I hope that's how that's pronounced. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord, and with shouting and with sound of the horn. And they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place, inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. When David had finished offering the burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins for each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house. David, after a period of mourning and wrestling with Uzzah's death, receives the ark, this time with no parade of note. The masses are unwritten of. The liveliness of the city wasn't aroused. But in the presence of the ark, David sought to delight his father. The ark was not a point of pride for him, but a symbol of God's bigness and goodness. He tore his clothing, offered costly sacrifice, and danced in a way that shattered cultural senses of propriety. For David saw that he had nothing he could offer God but his heartfelt affection, his sonship, his obedience, his disregard of what the world says, because God is simply good, bigger and better. As for David, he will celebrate before the Lord. He will not strategically analyze the situation to advance his personal prerogative before the Lord. He will not play it cool to ensure he doesn't embarrass himself before the Lord. He will not compartmentalize his spiritual life in a way that allows him to follow his own preferences while looking like a good Christian before the Lord. He will simply celebrate before him. For David loves God's laws and sees them as extensions of his holiness and his character. God gave the law for himself as a way to make clear how great he is and how inadequate we are. It's a remedial treaty that redirects our worship, given as the manifestation of his authority, holiness, and righteousness. His law exists as a way to make clear our need of his mercy, grace, patience, and long-suffering compassion. If none ever stand in need of them, they can never be exercised, and consequently, never be known. If none, Curtis often reminds us that the 7 most important words for a Christian are, "He is God, and I am not." Isn't that nice? Isn't that so much simpler? So much better than toothless religious practices done without the power of the Holy Spirit and his resurrection manifest? God's bigness doesn't exist to be an awful burden to you. On the contrary, his bigness means that even though he is so monumentally huge, he loves you, and he is for you, and he wants to celebrate with you. But the result is blundered if you're not seeing him for who he is. A strong father, a worthy legislator, a fair judge, a gracious king, a God who is bigger than you. And that's a good thing.